2 million Christians have fled Iraq and become refugees in the last 2 decades, but no one seems to care about them, neither the media nor the universities. Everyone is obsessed with the Palestinian refugees. Did you know that the UN has two agencies for refugees? One for hundreds of millions of refugees all over the world, and another one called UNRWA, which is only for the most privileged refugees on earth, the Palestinians. Don't just take my word for it. Check it out for yourself.
So right off the bat, that's a pretty crazy statement to say. It's actually an oxymoron, privilege and refugee, as if to say that you're someone who's displaced from a country, you're someone who is a refugee, and you're somehow privileged. And another thing is that this is a very strawman argument. This is a whataboutism. He's bringing up that there are other refugees, and he's trying to say that these other refugees are somehow not getting enough resources. These other refugees are somehow not being as quote-unquote privileged as Palestinians. He doesn't provide any specific refugee group. He doesn't provide any type of suggestion. He doesn't really even care about these refugees. He only brings them up to say that the Palestinians are privileged and are stealing resources from these other refugees, which again is an extremely blanket statement. There is no context provided. He does not provide any type of source to say this. He does not say that UNRWA takes money from other refugee camps and gives it to Palestinians. He just simply says that because UNRWA exists and that because they help Palestinian refugees that they're somehow privileged. Extremely insane that you can say the word privileged refugee. That's like absolutely insane. That's literally taking two things that are opposite of each other, privilege and refugee, and putting it in the same sentence. Also, what he was saying leading up to this is that he was saying that there were again, he's now conflating nations with the religion of Islam, saying that there are Muslim organizations that have displaced Christian individuals and have pushed them out of their countries. Again, I would argue that this has less to do with Islam and the religion and more to do with the nation. If you look at an example such as Turkey, Turkey is a country that is extremely defined by secularism as well as has an Islamic element. If you were to look at Turkey, it's a very polar country. It has a Muslim leader and there are Muslim roots, but at the same time, its liberation came after Ataturk when it's extremely secular. And the reason why I mention this is because, again, a nation is more diverse and more complicated and is not simply something that can be labeled as a quote-unquote Muslim country. Even if they say they're a Muslim country, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're following Islam. You could say that you're a Christian nation and you could follow things that were not in Christianity. And similarly so, the reason why I mentioned Turkey, here's a specific example, here's a specific historical context. They specifically have targeted Kurdish people, don't like Kurdish people. Well, there's historical context in line with that, but that is something that is part of that nation's mandate. That is not an Islamic thing. Muslims aren't, predisposed to say that I don't like Kurdish people. That's something that is part of their nation. Similarly so, Israel, who is not a Jewish state, and Jewish people live there, but Israel is a quote-unquote democracy. Israel is a nation in and of itself, doesn't really like the state of Palestine, and especially doesn't like Gaza, and does not like the politics that may come out of it. But again, there are Jewish people who do not follow that idea, and at the same time, the religion of Judaism has no real mandate against that. So I don't know why he keeps mixing nationalism with religion, but even so, he is not giving any specific examples. When he says Muslim organizations have done things to Christian minority groups or refugees, you got to be more specific. You got to say something. You got to point me in some direction where I go to Google and I find some information. What he's saying is extremely blanket terms that have no real substance and no real information attached to it. If you just say something that is not even specific enough, granted, he did say there are Muslim groups in Nigeria, fair enough. So that's something that is specific enough. If I wanted to learn more about it, I'll get a little bit more context. But if you at least provide some context, if you at least give an example to build your argument, to at least give the reader or the viewer a little bit more context, it'd be a lot more easier. And at the same time, I will again say that there is no real one-to-one ratio of a nation and a religion. There is no such thing as saying that Nigeria, which is not a Muslim country, is somehow going to be have afflictions or bad things because of the religion of Islam. And the same thing that you could say for organizations like Hamas or even ISIS, where they say that they're an Islamic organization. They are basically living the fullest of what the Islamic definition is. And that's not the case, because there's multiple examples where in Islam you're not supposed to, if you're in a state of war even, you're not supposed to destroy a tree. You're not supposed to destroy innocent civilians. You're not supposed to destroy the environment. And obviously these people have done things such as killing innocent civilians, which is not mandated by the religion. They've done things that are part of torture, and things of that nature, which again, in Islam, if you have a prisoner of war, you're supposed to actually treat them as a human being and not torture them and not hurt them. So, when he says these things and he's again conflating nations with religion and even at some point he's going to mix in ethnicity, I think it's very important to realize that there are differences between the three and all three are idempotent. But with the 2 points that he said so far, I don't think they provide enough context to go along with his line of thinking of saying that Palestinians are somehow privileged because they have their own refugee program. That's a very weird statement, and it's something that doesn't really bolster his opinion. But the reason why he says it is because he's trying to say that Palestinians are somehow being dealt with soft gloves and saying that they're being unfairly treated more positively. But in all reality, I mean, if you look at the billions of dollars the United States sends to Israel, I mean, how can you say that the West is somehow mistreating Israel and saying that, oh, they're on Palestine's side? I've never seen a country that gets more foreign aid act like they're somehow the victim in this. You can say that you don't agree with certain opinions, but to say that a refugee somehow has more privilege and more perks than a nation that has its own established military government as well as foreign aid rolling in is pretty insane and doesn't really exist in the logical sense because, again, there's no such thing as a privileged refugee.